All right, we're going to be discussing Bereshit, the beginning, and while we have here an English translation of Bereshit, as I have always said before, unfortunately, the translation itself is very close to almost a corruption, because there is very little that is translated that makes any sense. I say very little. In fact, not that there are some parts that are difficult to understand without an interpretation from the Kabbalah. But let us take the beginning of Bereshit, the first verse. It says, in the beginning God created the heaven and earth. Now, if that was the translation, it says in day 3, verse 9, and the Lord said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together unto one place, and let the dry land appear. Which means up until that point, there was no land. There was no dry land. Then what is meant in the first verse of Bereshit, of Genesis, that He created the heaven and the earth. In addition, in Genesis 1, day 1, it says that the Lord saw the light, that it was good, and the Lord divided the light from the darkness, and He called the light day, and the darkness He called night. And this is all in day 1. And yet we know that on day 4, it says that the Lord created the different lights. He created the sun and the moon. And in verse 16, and the Lord made 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light, which is the moon, to rule the night, and together with the stars and so forth. But the sun did not appear until the 4th day. How did we have a concept of day and night? Was it a different kind of day and night that we experience today? Our day and night depends on how long the sun appears. When the sun goes down, we have night. When the sun rises, we have day. But if the sun did not exist until the 4th day, how was there in day 1, without the moon and without the sun, how was there day and night in day 1? Another question that we have here is that on day 6, the Lord created Adam and Eve. So it says. We take verse 27. And the Lord created man in His own image. In the image of the Lord created He him. Male and female created He them. He already created male and female. And we all know about in Genesis 2, chapter 2, it says what? That from the rib of Adam came Eve. And yet, on the 6th day, it says that He created male and female. How do we reconcile all of these concepts? And if he created male and female, we all know the story of the tree of knowledge, good and bad. And we have a story there that the snake convinced Eve to eat from the tree of knowledge. And she ate, and therefore was punished. But if we look closely at the verse itself, we will see that Adam was created, first of all, in verse 7 of chapter 2. Remember, in Genesis 1, chapter 1, it says that he created male and female. Who was that? Obviously, Adam and Eve. Then it says, in chapter 2, he formed man, the Lord formed man from the dust of the ground. He breathed into his nostrils, verse number 7 of chapter 2, and man became a living soul. So when did Adam come into existence? In Genesis 2. What does it mean that he created male and female? That means that Eve was not here yet, only Adam. And when did the Lord say to Adam not to eat from the tree of knowledge? In verse 16, it says, verse 16, Eve is not here yet. Only Adam is here. And it says in verse 16, and the Lord commanded man, saying, of every tree of the garden thou mayest freely eat. And in verse 17, but of the tree of knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it. For in that day that thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die. And immediately after verse 17, there's a discussion on how Eve was created. So in effect, because in verse 18 it says, and the Lord said, it's not good that man should be alone. I'll make him a helpmate. And out of the ground the Lord formed every beast, and so on and so forth. Suddenly, he goes on to, here it says, it's not good that man should be alone. And he tells him, don't eat from the tree of knowledge. And suddenly the verse begins in verse 19, out of the ground he created what? All of the beasts of the fields, all of the fowl of the air, the birds, and brought them unto man to see whatever he would call them. But on day 5 of creation, it already says that he created, day 5, which is verse 24, verse 20. And the Lord said, let the water swarm with swarms of living creatures, and let there be fowl above the earth, sea monsters. All of these things were created when? On day 5. And here, it says suddenly from the earth came fowl, came the beast. Seems to be a contradiction. But what is even stranger is here, between verse 17, which says, do not eat from the tree of knowledge, to verse 19, where it says he created the beasts, the birds, living creatures. In between, on verse 18, they stick in the verse which says, it isn't good that Adam should be by himself, and I must create as a kinagdo. which means literally, I should create for him a mate. First of all, the mate was there day 6. Secondly, if he's talking about creating a mate, then create the mate. No. After he creates the birds, it says again in verse 20, and man gave names to all the cattle, because they were just created. He had to give them a name. And to the fowl of the air, and to every beast of the field. But for Adam there was not found a helpmeet for him. Well, we knew that before. Does the verse mean that maybe the law thought he would marry an animal? And there's literally no sense. Literally no sense in this verse. And then in verse 21 it says, and the Lord finally caused a deep sleep to fall upon man, and he slept, and he took one of the ribs and closed up the place with flesh instead. And the rib which the Lord had taken from man, he made a woman. That means in verse 21, we finally see the appearance of women. Now, you all are familiar with the story of the snake who convinced Eve to eat of the tree of knowledge. And she was punished because of that. In fact, she was punished, and therefore she would not have to wait 9 months and go through the period and pain of pregnancy, which was not her lot before she ate from the tree of knowledge. She was punished. But actually, if we look at the verse, it should have been Adam alone who should be punished, because it was Adam who was there before in verse 17. Verse 17, the Lord said, do not eat from the tree of knowledge. Verse 17. And the only one who was there was Adam, not Eve. Eve was not there. So why was she punished? And we can go on and on and on. And I don't want to take up the hour and a half of just ridiculing the literal translation of Bereshit, because it makes no sense. But there's one other aspect that I would like to mention, and that is in verse 22, it says, and the rib which the Lord took from man, he made a woman. But it doesn't say that in the Hebrew. It says, Vayiven Hashem Elokim et hatsela asher lakach min Adam leisha. He created a new rib, but it says he took the rib from Adam. What do you mean he built the rib? If he took Adam's rib, then he had a rib. Why did he have to create a new rib by which Eve shall be born? All of these questions, and I said we can go on and on to try to achieve some kind of order in Bereshit, because Bereshit is really the beginning. And as we know in Talmud Sefirot, we're trying to learn the beginning. Because if you don't know the beginning, if you don't know the root of things, the branches of things differ. And you can't really get a clarity. It's when you inspect the root, if you inspect the DNA, as we can understand it today, you will know everything that's going to happen. But if the physician at one time could only examine and explore the body of an individual, 9 times out of 10 he doesn't know what was really going on. He doesn't know why one person is attacked with an illness and another one isn't. How would he know why it happens to one and not another? But now with this new discovery of DNA, the root, they can begin to understand why each individual shapes into a particular form as he does. because each DNA is different. So the importance of inspecting and exploring the root of things is essential to understand not only ourselves, but to understand everything, because no branches can be different than what the root itself dictates. So before we'll make an attempt to achieve some kind of answer, I guess we should understand the beginning. And in Bereshit, in the Zohar, he goes right into the beginning of things. And with that beginning, and with the understanding of the real beginning, we'll understand everything that is included in the beginning here of Bereshit, at least. Now, one other point we should mention, and that is that there seems to be an obvious Genesis 1, Bereshit 1, and obviously there is a Bereshit bit. That's without having any answers, because first it said, it discussed the beasts, and it discussed male and female in Genesis 1. When I say Genesis 1, I'm discussing the first 7 days of creation. Then in Perek Bet, chapter 2, he's discussing the same situation of creation of Adam, creation of Eve, creation of all the beasts and the fowls and so forth. So obviously, if we recognize now that there exists two Genesis, not one, but two. The first 7 days, and then another Genesis, whatever that means, but another Genesis, starting with chapter 2. So we are tonight going to, I remember that in Israel I studied this with the group, and it took us about 1.5 years before we completed the first 7 pages of Genesis. To give you an overview, what we're going to be discussing here is exactly how the Big Bang came about. The fact that they should even think of a Big Bang without having experience. If all scientists were mekubalim and they could go back to the future, I understand. They go back to the first moment of the Big Bang, they experience it, they see it, and therefore they can understand it. But what amazes me is how something that happened, according to them, 4 billion years ago, and they begin to explain what happened 4 billion years ago. It's truly a phenomenon. To explain something that happened 4 billion years ago, not even within the range of concept of time, of 4 billion years, and they should say there was a Big Bang. And this Big Bang was, again, not with thought, but it happened. It happened. How could one believe that it happened and everything came out in such perfect unity? They don't even ask, of themselves, how ridiculous am I becoming when I foster these kind of theories? So here in Bereshit, the Zohar explains away what happened, how this world came into existence. Because everything here in Bereshit obviously is discussing from our world and onwards. I mean, the galaxy that we can observe. That there are many, many other galaxies. According to the Zohar, there are 253 more galaxies. Maybe it's 257, I don't recall. How he knows that there are 257 other galaxies, beside ours. I mean, do you imagine? Man has a lot of nerve. He lives in the confines of this universe, and he's telling me that out there beyond our universe, there are another 257. I mean, he knows even how to count each one. What's that? Finite number. I forget exactly what the number was, but a finite number. Not it was not many, not infinite numbers, but a specific number. A specific number. So I'll go to the Zohar here, and for those of you who may not understand how the Zohar or Rabbi Shimon could trace back to 4 million years ago, if that figure is correct. I really don't know if it's correct or not. Neither do they know if it's correct or not. But even if we were to say it was 4 million or 4 billion, but the figure now seems to be boiled down to 4 billion, it seems to be in contradiction also to the Torah, right? And therefore so many scientists now come to the realization that this really is nothing more than a fairy tale, because it's been well established, I don't know by whom, but it's well established that the world is 4 billion years old. According to the Torah, according to our calendar, is 5,747. That's a far cry from 4 billion. Can't imagine where the discrepancy comes in. But they should have given the answer themselves, and I'm rather surprised that they didn't. Because today in quantum, you know that there are different levels of frames of references. What does relativity mean? I see something one way, another person sees it another way, and the scientist says they're both right. How could they both be right? Because within every frame of reference, there are different dimensions, many dimensions. Genesis 1 is talking in one frame of reference, as we shall shortly learn. That frame of reference, I might say, is not 4 billion, but I would rather use the simpler word, infinite. Infinite. There is no number, because all of the Big Bang that we will shortly discuss, we will discover that we are not even discussing day and night. We are discussing concepts of thought. We are discussing concepts of thought. And just like we have already learned that in thought, you don't talk in terms of time, space, and motion. Can I travel the entire earth? If I've ever taken a trip all around the world, can I go all around the world in a second with thought? Of course. I can begin from my first stopover, if it's California, then on to Hong Kong, and then on to India, Bombay, and then on to Damascus, if we're permitted in there, and then on to Paris, and then back to New York. How long did it take us just now? No time. Could I picture each stopover if I was there? Could I picture everything I saw that may have taken a year? Can I see it all within a matter of seconds? I can. So in other words, if the body physically has to experience this trip, it requires maybe 6 weeks. But for the mind, it's another frame of reference. The mind can experience every part of that trip in a matter of seconds. So there are different frameworks, obviously. Therefore, if the Torah is speaking in terms of days, as we shall learn, it doesn't mean days in terms that we understand 24 hours a day to a day, but he's discussing in terms of time in another framework. The Zohar says, Beresh hur menuta de malka, and you know that we always read the Aramaic because there's a purpose why the Zohar was written in Aramaic. Because this immediately, by just listening to these words, opens up another dimension in our mental computer. And so for us to easily grasp what's going on here, if we only use 5%, it's going to be very difficult. But if we read the Zohar, which everyone says, and that's what the Sephardim many years ago would read the Zohar without understanding a word of it. Without understanding a word. They read it religiously day in and day out. Because they understood that the mere fact of making contact with the word was making contact with the entire dimension that the word was attempting to describe. The same way as we meditate on the Aleph Bet, because the Aleph Bet is the letters by which everything came into existence. The Aleph Bet created the world, the Aleph Bet. So we're going to read this first paragraph of the Zohar in Bereshit, but I will translate. Bereshit or Menuta de Malka, Galif Gilufa, Betihira Ila, Putsina de Kardinuta. In the beginning, the king revealed his desire, which we know from the Talmud Sefirot. There is only one desire in the king, in the Lord, or the force, and that is the desire to expand, desire to express, which is, in terms of thought, the desire to share. Galif Gilufa, he made impressions. B'tihira ilah, with a, just to translate it without understanding it at least, tihira with an upper level of purity, from which came butsina de kardinuta, a spark of striking. This is what we call the zivug dehaka'ah in Hebrew, striking by binding. Striking by binding. Can you imagine? You strike something, and that way you connect with it. A paradox. Striking literally means pushing it away. But by striking, we actually draw it closer to ourselves. We'll discuss it. V'nafik gav satim distimu, and from this striking was revealed things which have been encased and enclosed, mirazah de Ein Sof. From this striking by binding came the secrets of the Ein Sof. What is the Ein Sof? That frame of reference where time, space, and motion does not exist. Where time, space, and motion does not exist. Mirazah de Ein Sof. Where time, space, and motion does not exist. Just where, like we discussed previously, thought. What is thought? Again, to an extent, it's not limited to time, space, and motion. We can cover that entire earth of our trip in a matter of seconds. So there is an element that exists beyond time, space, and motion. The ultimate that exists beyond time, space, and motion is the frame of reference of Ein Sof. From this striking by binding came out the secrets of the Ein Sof. Alright. Kutra begulma. There came forms. Golam, you've heard the word golam. Forms came out. A golam came out. Again, we are discussing not in terms of that physical framework, but I want just to go through it, because as I want to repeat again, the fact that I am reading and translating the words, we are literally opening up that mental computer, so when we try to analyze and explore and investigate just what the Zohar is trying to, through the benefit of the Sulam, of Rabbi Ashlag's interpretation, we will be prepared for what he has to tell us. What came out? Na'itz bazaka came out like a circle of a ring. I mean, it's really confusing, right? From all of this came out something that resembled a tabat, igul kitabat, like a ring. For those who study Talmud Sefirot, in fact, suddenly there's no mystery attached to the word tabat, right? Talking about the circle. Because that's reality. But for those people who have had the opportunity to read the Sansino's translation of the Zohar, this is what they would be reading. And obviously that would be all Greek. Okay? There was lo chava, velo cham, velo sumak, velo yarok, velo gavan klal. In this frame of reference, there was no white, no red, no black, and no green. The four essential colors did not exist in that frame of reference. But we experience colors, and we know already from the Zohar that colors are colors. Why do they become manifest as they do? Why is red red? Why is there such a thing as red? So, with the help of our scientists, I can explain away by saying that red has an intelligence. It speaks. It talks. It's the color of negativity. It draws. So does black draw. What is the difference? We will discuss that. But in the frame of reference of the Ein Sof, we did not, or that frame of reference did not experience these various colors. There were no such thing as various colors because there were no degrees of different intelligences. There was only one thought. Kadmadid mishicha avid gavnin lanara legav. However, when things began to become measured, which means obviously the kav, for those of you who have studied the Talmud Sefirot, then things began to develop and become manifest in different frames, different intelligences, different thoughts, different manifestations. That means when a tree was created, like it says in Genesis 1, a tree, but yet we know there are infinite varieties of trees. Yet it seems he only created a tree. It doesn't say he created many trees. He says he created trees. How many? It seems to be infinite. The same thing with cattle. The same thing with fowl. Infinite. But at one time, there was no such thing. It was all in unified whole, but then it all developed. Okay? Let's now understand what is he trying to tell us. In fact, he also mentions black. For the scientists, what does black mean? The absence of light. This is their concept. From a Kabbalistic point of view, the Zohar says, in Ein Sof, there was no black. But after Ein Sof, after that world of complete unity, there was black. Not an absence of light, but there was a thought and a concept called black. It is an absolute power that draws. You know the difference between white roofs and black roofs. white roofs deflect the sun. Black roofs draw it in. What does it mean? Because there's an absence of light, or because there's a power that draws that sun to itself? So from the Kabbalistic point of view, there was black. Now what does that mean? So we'll jump to Rabbi Ashlag's explanation of what we've just learned. As we said before, there was a desire to share. That was the beginning. In other words, Bereshit, as the Zohar says elsewhere, does not mean the beginning, in the beginning. Because in the beginning it says He created heaven and earth, and we've already raised the question. There could not have been heaven and earth, because on the third day there appeared the ground, Hayabasha. There was no ground until that point. So where was earth? How could the Torah say there was earth in the beginning? And what is the Shemayim, the heavens? When on day 4, the heavens, as far as we understand heavens, it means the sun, the moon, the stars, whatever makes up that heaven, was not there until day 4. So therefore the Zohar says, Bereshit means bara shit. In Aramaic, shit, shin yud taf, means 6. In the beginning, He created 6. So it has nothing to do with the beginning. And we know, for those of you who are familiar with the first letter of the Torah, it's with a bet. It's with a bet. The bet indicating a concept which we call cosmic bina. But that's the mother that created everything. But what was created has nothing to do with the word in the beginning, because that would be a corruption. But He created 6. That 6 is called by a code name, and I use that word code, a code name called Shemayim. The Eta Aretz does not mean earth, but means it is the coded word for Malchut, for desire to receive, the intelligence of desire to receive. The 6 is this aspect of sharing, and the earth is the recipient of everything. Everything on earth receives in one way or another from the cosmos, everything that is out there. How did all this begin? And for what reason did it begin? For what reason did it begin? So first he wants to explain away this word butzina de kaldinuta. What does it mean? Kisheorot rotzim latzet ulhidgalot. When something wants to become manifest, orot. What does orot mean? Lights. That's the code word for what? Lights. Even if this room is dark, we know from a Kabbalistic point of view, there is light here. This bulb only reveals that which was already there. But what does orot mean? It means forces. Forces that want to penetrate. So says the Zohar. Forces that want to penetrate. Those forces can even take the form of, if we're sitting, and how many thoughts can we get, let's say in an hour? If you're sitting, and in fact, you don't even want to think. Right? You're making a concerted effort not to think. What happens? Nothing. We don't think. We can sit 1 hour without any thought going through, because we have decided that we don't want to think. Is that true? Absolutely false. To sit 1 hour, some people I think might even find it difficult to sit 30 seconds with a command to the mind, don't think. With a positive command to the mind, do not think. Within that 30 seconds, you could be conducting a worldwide business in just 30 seconds. And despite the fact that you yourself don't want to think, those are all forces that want to become revealed. And they must first become revealed in the mind, and then from those thoughts, they become manifest on a physical level. That is called orot, lights. Those lights are infinite. Those lights seem to go to one place and not to another. In other words, right here, if we all stop for a moment to think, everyone would probably think of something else. Now, why is everybody thinking of something else, and why aren't we thinking of the same thought? Why does one think of one thing? So, your psychiatrist, your psychologist will say, well, you'll usually think about those things that were close to you during the day. You dream. What do you dream about? You dream about those things that you may have experienced in the past day or two, but that's not true, because it never always happens. In fact, it very seldom happens that you will be actually dreaming about things that you've gone through in the last day or two. They can be so remote. And more times than none, they will even be thoughts that you never thought about. Not only that you never experienced those thoughts, but you never even thought about those thoughts before, and suddenly you're getting this new vision of thoughts. All of these things, all of these concepts are referred to as orot, as lights. Alright? Are we clear on that? This is what the code word of light means. It means forces. These forces want to become revealed. How is one of the methods that these forces become revealed? One is through a bulb that reveals this light that is here already in terms of light, because that bulb does not create light. That bulb does not create light. There is light in this room. All it does is reveal that light that was concealed before. The same way as what does the mind do? When the mind thinks, the mind reveals what? Something new. And when we do things, what do? We reveal that which we thought about first, because it's only an imbecile that does things without thinking. So when we do things, what are we doing? We are in effect revealing thoughts that came to our mind. That's how we do things. So everything that ultimately becomes revealed is because there was a force that wanted to become revealed, and that's why I think of what I think, because that thought came to me, not to somebody else. I was bombarded by a thought, because despite the billions of dollars that have already been spent on research of the mind, nobody still knows why one person thinks about one thing. And you can have brainstorms which have nothing to do with you, which you've never thought about. And suddenly you think about something. Where did it come from? So we know, from a Kabbalistic point of view, those forces exist. There's nothing, in fact, as Shlomo HaMelech said, there is nothing new under the sun. Whatever becomes manifest, which appears to be something new. There was no television before, right? Now we have television. The answer is, of course not. Television existed long before the 19th or even the 17th century. Long, long ago. All of this knowledge existed because you have to ask yourself the question, is tomorrow here today? Is tomorrow here today? The rule of cause and effect. Today is a cause for tomorrow. Does the seed contain the fruit? Of course it does. But the fruit will be here tomorrow. How could it exist already if it doesn't exist until a period of 3 years may go by? No, it already exists where? In the seed. So everything that becomes manifest already exists from before. This aspect of Butzina de Kadinuta, he compares it to someone taking a rod or a stick, well, let's say a strong stick, or he has a rock and he throws it upon another rock. A spark comes out. A spark comes out. Why does a spark come out? Why does a spark come out? You're up two stones together. A spark comes out. Why? So we have to say two things from a Kabbalistic point of view. That's the way we understand it. That spark that came out, or when I throw something, or if I hit a stone and a spark seems to emerge, what happened? What happened when I struck the stone? Several things happened. First of all, if we believe, as the scientist says, that thought is energy, you know how powerful thought can be, we influence people. How do you influence people? You make people do what you want them to do. If you're a strong person and the other one is weak, you could influence the other person. What do you mean you influence him? I mean, what has transferred from one person to the other? Words? I mean, words are powerful enough. If you tell me physical might, we understand. I force someone because I said I have a gun and I'll shoot you if you don't do what I say. That's one way. But we know that we can also influence an individual without physical might. What does that mean? That my thought, energy, intelligence, the way the scientist explains it, is transferred and hits that individual. If he's weak, let's say I throw a rock into water, the water can't push back that rock. The rock is too powerful. If I throw it down with the force, it means I'm more powerful than water. In fact, I can push my hand right into water. Water does not have the capacity to resist my energy. This table, assuming it's a steel rock, table of rock, and I try to penetrate it, suddenly here I cannot. In other words, there is another thought, energy, intelligence called rock that has an energy intelligence that can resist my force. These are forces. What kind of forces? Physical forces? Physical forces? No. Because we're told that 99% of this table and rock is atoms. The atoms here, they haven't even had any force. There's infinite trillions of atoms here, and I can go right through it, but I can't go through here. This rock I can't go through, because there is an energy intelligence that can resist. Now when I hit a rock, it means I want to make a hole in the rock, let's say. That was my purpose in beating the rock. What comes out of that? A spark. Why does that spark come out? Because the rock is resisting the penetration of my force. This is, I think, rather simple to understand. What comes out of that resistance? A spark. Why a spark? Let's say I've taken a spear made out of a rock and I hit it, and out comes a spark. Why a spark? Why does a spark come out? So we learned the principle, like in Talmud Esesfirot, that like in a bulb, before the bulb ignites, there's a spark. Why is there a spark? Everything is a spark. Every time there's a clash, sometimes you see the spark and sometimes you don't. You're trying to convince somebody, or somebody asks you a question, and you try to explain it, and suddenly he says, "Oh, I see the light." Suddenly he sees the light. There you can say there was no physical contact. It was just a thought trying to be explained, and suddenly the other person says, "Oh, I see the light." What does that mean? That when two entities meet, and one resists the other, like in the bulb, what emerges from that? Light, a spark. Now what is that spark? What is that spark? New light? Or is that spark revealing light that is already there? So, without going into a great detail, what is revealed by that spark is the light and energy that was going through between these two people, creating a circuit of energy. That's what it really means. Alright? When the Lord wanted to share, and we know, because that's always his intent, that's the force of Ein Sof. That's the force that encompasses every force that there exists in the world, even to the extent of my hand striking a rock, meaning there's a force. That force actually is the same force that is called Ein Sof. Anything that wants to move from one place outwards into another, I want to influence somebody. That means an energy, thought, intelligence wants to now capture, overcome, overtake something else. It wants to expand. I mean, when someone has an idea and he wants everybody to believe in the idea, he expands, he tries to influence people. So what's actually happening? When 1,000 people will accept this thought, what has happened? What has happened? There has been a manifestation, there has been an extension of my thought into everybody. Therefore, everybody agrees.
Then there would be no spark. There would be a spark only if there was a resistance.
Right. And
in other words, if there was a conflict of your thoughts against mine,
then there would be a circuit of energy. Now, what happens? Well, that explains away why people forget things. We study, right? Mm-hmm. We study. A week later, a year later, 7 years later, I can't remember. I know something and I can't remember it. And maybe an hour later, 7 hours later, I remember. Two things wrong here. First of all, did I study that? Did I know that? I can't remember the name of a person, but I knew his name once. And why don't I know it now? Why don't I know it now? Furthermore, if I don't know it now, how come I remember an hour later? This happens every day to us. Is that right? Why? The answer is, and therein lies the answer. In anything, for it to be a circuit of energy, meaning a continuous flow, not short-circuitedness, it's like electric comes into a bulb. If it blows, what does it mean? The electric company cut off the electricity? When the bulb blows, it means because there was no more electricity coming in? No. It still comes to that point. So what happened? The filament, the resistance, that doesn't work anymore. The two poles in the bulb didn't blow, in fact. The only thing that blows is the resistance. When that resistance operates, is functional, you have a circuit. That means when you learn something, you learned the name of somebody, you met somebody and he told you his name, right? The reason you can forget that name is sometimes you never forget. Does it mean because he didn't make an impression upon you? Yes, this is one of the answers, stupid answers given by those who do research into memory, is because he didn't make a deep impression upon you. Is that always the case? No. There are times when we met someone on one occasion for a few moments and we'll remember his name. And then there is somebody that made a deep impression upon us and we can't remember his name. So there are times this way and there are times that way. When does something penetrate into me is when there is resistance. That's the only time you get the circuit. Because if there was no resistance, it's like the bulb. If there was no resistance, it stops short of circuit. Without a filament, the bulb won't light up, despite the fact that the electric has come into the bulb, if the filament is not functional. So when we remember or we do not remember, is because it didn't penetrate. And if it did penetrate, then you'll ask, how come I don't remember? Let's say if I remember later, that means, if I never remember, that means there was never a penetration of that person, that person's name, and there was no resistance. What do we mean by resistance? You mean I should resist everybody I meet?
So there's a small difference between opposing your opinion or restricting.
Or we might go one step further, because I don't want to say we have to oppose every time someone's opinion in order to create a circuit of energy as we do in the bulb. There can also be a sharing, an exchange of views. Therefore, someone who doesn't want to listen, all he can do is just tell me what he has to say, and when I want to raise a question, oh, wait a minute, can I ask you something? But no, he has no time for the feedback. Is that right? No time for the feedback? I won't remember that person. That person never penetrated. Because before there can be a meeting of the minds, there can be resistance. That is one. Or, whatever, each one becomes the other. In other words, that's also a change of position. He wanted to share. Now he's prepared to become the receiver. When each of us become both the sharer and the receiver, you have a circuit of energy. But if it's a one-way, you see, it's one way, that's the only way, is there's no contact. It's like the electric with the bulb. It touches, but it doesn't make contact. It touches, but it doesn't make contact, because the only way there can be contact is by resisting, which would create a greater exchange of ideas. When we say resistance, we don't mean I don't want to listen. But when I listen sincerely, and then I raise questions, in effect, that the raising of questions is really resistance.
What about the opposing part? If he tells you something and I disagree, now that means like it's two rocks hitting against each other and creating a spark.
That's right. Then there could be the chance of a circuit between the two.
But let's say I'm still resisting.
You know what they say? You know what they say about somebody who just listens and never has one question to ask? The chances are that he walked out and will never remember what you told him.
If he didn't have any questions.
If you don't see, right? He's just listening and he seems to be absorbing everything. He will remember nothing. Mm-hmm. He will remember nothing. He won't even remember the name. He will never remember the name. The one who does remember the name, later on, and that's the question we raise, why would he remember it later? If he knows it, then he knows it now. Why doesn't he know it now? Is because at that moment, he was not in a position of rejection. He did not connect back to that period in time, but I won't go into that. Alright? But in any event, resistance creates a circuit of energy. Resistance creates a circuit of energy. Nothing more and nothing less. Alright? So this is Butzina the Kadinuta. So the first bang, according to the Zohar, what really happened was at a given moment, and we know why. Why did this big bang come about? Why did this factor of not wanting come about? Because The Lord wants to share, and that's constant. That's why we're bombarded. When we can sit for a minute and we don't want to think, but it's all coming in, is because everything wants to become revealed. Everything that is wants to become expressed. Therefore, we can't stop thoughts from coming in, because thoughts are lights, thoughts are energies. So we can't stop it, because it wants to become revealed. At the time of the Big Bang, or the time of creation, what happened at that moment? Because of the concept of bread of shame, the receiver did not want to receive, and therefore what happened? Putzina de Kaldinuta. There was a spark that came out, because there was a conflict, there was resistance. The Lord wanted to share. At that moment, the vessel, meaning us, because of bread of shame, because the Lord just was giving, and what could we give in return? There could be no exchange of ideas. There could be no exchange between me and the Creator. What could I give Him? The same way as two people who engage in any kind of discussion or dialogue, if there is no exchange of ideas, there will never be a remembrance or a butzina de kadinuta. There will never be a spark that emerges from that conversation, because there must be a circuit of energy. There must be resistance, meaning I have another opinion. I don't want to receive bread of shame or whatever. So what sparked the creation was what? The 6 and the 1. The reason we said Bereshit, 6 and 1, because these two forces, which Bina, for those of you familiar with the Sfirot, the Bina consciousness created 6 and 1. 6, this number 6, represents 6 different aspects of sharing. The 1, which is known by the code name Earth, Aretz, that's the code name for it, represents, like in astrology, the Earth sign. What is the Earth sign? Gravity. What is the force of gravity? Desire to receive. That's why the Earth draws everything to itself. This was created. What do you mean it was created? This was the beginning of everything. When we had the 6 and the 1, and that will explain away why it doesn't say Vayera Vayboka Yom HaShvi'i. And that's why that was the end. That was a question raised, why in Yom HaShvi'i it doesn't say Vayera Vayboka Yom HaShvi'i, because on Shabbat there is day and night as well. So why shouldn't it say Vayera Vayboka? We'll understand that. But in any event, what happened in the first verse in Genesis 1, Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim v'et haaretz, he is describing, according to the Zohar, the Big Bang. In that one verse. That one verse explains it away all. 6 and 1. There was a conflict between the two of them. Because one was sharing, one was receiving, and of course, as he will explain, that there was a concept, only the Zohar explains, why was the Big Bang? You ask any scientist today, you're trying to explain away how it began. Don't you think you should raise the question once? Why did it begin in the first place? Not how it began, and how it became manifest, and how it developed, but why did it all begin in the first place? The answer is, says the Zohar, Bereshu Menuta de Malka, in the beginning. What do you mean in the beginning? The first confrontation was Shamayim ve'aretz. They are two opposite aspects. Two opposite aspects. Shamayim represents the sharing concept. Aretz is the code name for the force that we even know as today as gravitation. These two were in conflict. These two were in conflict. And they produced what? A spark. They produced a spark. They produced a spark. And what happened? Now that this spark became produced, this spark first emanated not as a day, but it was Vayera Vayboka Yom Echad, as you've already, some other places, the Zohar raises the question, why does it say Vayera Vayboka Yom Echad? And there was evening and morning unity, not day one, because day one would be Yom Rishon, because in Hebrew, the word for day one would be Yom Rishon as Yom Sheni, which is day two. It does not say Yom Rishon, it says Yom Echad. It was a unified day.
Does it form up a day?
What's that?
That would form up a 24-hour?
No. We are not even discussing days here. The word Yom is a code word. As every single word in Genesis 1, not one word, I say not even one word, not that some of the word, but there is not one word that is not a code that represents something else. So the word Yom means a thought, energy, intelligence. A concept. Only thought. Not table, not animal. That means every day that we are discussing is a new thought of power, of energy, of or came into existence. Because of this clash. In Talmud Esesvirot we go through, we learn how through the Or Choser each one developed. We're at it now, incidentally. We're at it now, how each day developed. But what Yom means is not day, but it means a certain concept. Now it says Yom Echad. Yom Echad, it means it was unified. It was unified. Why is it called unified? Because just as in conception between male and female, the male is the sharing aspect, the woman is the vessel, they meet, and the sperm and the egg clash. When there will be conception is when they clash. If there is no resistance to the egg, to the sperm, nothing will happen. There is what they call the zivug dehaka'ah. There is a clash between the two. What happens when there is a clash between the two? They become unified.
Where's spark?
That's the spark. A light develops.
The unification, I see.
But first they clashed. And if they didn't clash between each other, there would be no light. There would be no birth, ultimate birth. So this clashing, at the moment of clash, unifies the positive and the negative, like in the pole. You have a positive pole and you have a negative pole. They are two separate. One is positive, one is negative. They're the opposites. What happens when the filament strikes back the electricity? What happens? The plus and the minus become unified. At that moment, they become unified. This is why it says Yom Echad and it doesn't say Yom Rishon. Because we are not discussing days. We are not discussing the first process. We are discussing at that moment there is unity. Then what happens after then? Then comes the limbs, the head, different parts. But at that moment of life, at that moment when they meet, there is no. We can't observe a separation, can we? At that moment in the fetus. There is no different parts. Why? Because at the beginning there must be unity. There must be this sharing process of restriction. Restriction came into effect at that moment, and at that moment you have unity. By clashing, but what does it mean clashing? Because each one becomes interchangeable. Each one becomes, like we, in the Kabbalah for the layman, the poor man and the rich man. You all know that story where the poor man was invited in by this very rich man who realized this poor man didn't eat in weeks, didn't have a good meal, and he begs him to come down and sit, and he says, who needs your food? But he says, look, I can see you didn't eat. He says, who needs the food? And they start fighting. The rich man says, please sit down and eat. I know you need it. And the poor man says, who needs you? There's a clash, isn't there? And then the poor man finally says to the rich man, well, if it means that much to you, I will eat. So with every bite that the poor man takes, the rich man is having a pleasure, right? With every bite that the poor man takes, he doesn't even feel that he's a poor man. He's looking at the rich man. Look what I'm doing for him. He even forgets that he's eating. All he's doing is only doing a favor. There's a conflict here. There was a clash. But each one became, by clashing, each one complements the other. That's what happens at conception. That's why it's so important.
The question. The Rav said that Bereshit be not created the sixth. This is the aspect of sharing. Ours is the seventh, which is Malchut, the aspect of receiving.
Which was the result of, right.
Which was what?
The result was receiving. From the sharing concept comes the aspect of receiving.
What happened to Shemayim?
Shemayim is the code name for the six.
Okay. So what is the purpose of having two names?
No, first he's telling you Bereshit, and what is that? How is that six represented? By the code word called Shemayim, and in the Shemayim there will be this embodiment of these six major planets, right? Plus the moon.
So then why not Parashat? Why not create the seven?
Because the six represent the astral influences of sharing, and like we learned on the Shana Rabbah, the moon is that vehicle, that channel for the other six. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
The combination of all astral influences are funneled how? How are we influenced? Through the six. But what is the recipient, and what is that which delivers the bundle to me? Via the moon. Via the moon. Is that right? That's why we went out the Shana Rabbah, because the moon was going to bring all of those influences that will become manifest throughout the year at that moment. But which is the revealment of those six? Which is the revealment of the seed? The seed, if I put a seed on a table, what, will anything ever happen? The full potential of the tree is there. Nothing will happen. It requires what? An aspect of something connected with what we call malchut, with something which has only one thought, energy, intelligence. What? To receive. Right? The rich man could never have the pleasure of sharing if a poor man did not exist that was hungry, that had a desire to receive.
Or was it Shemayim that created then the Malchut? The arts?
No, Bina. The cosmic Bina created both. That's why we say that's why we say on Rosh Hashanah it scales. They're both on an equal level. But
it doesn't say the Malchut also, the seventh. It says
no.
Sheep.
That's right. Only the six, because when the six were created, you see, when the furniture is created, it then is going to look for someone to receive it, right? That furniture, which is potential pleasure, right, doesn't become manifest as a pleasure as long as it stays in the store. It requires what? Someone to take into itself, or himself or herself, that pleasure of that furniture, right? So the sharing, the manifestation of sharing, which takes place in 6 stages, all represent the aspect of sharing, represent the aspect of orot, represent the aspect of Hashem, of the Lord, in His sharing concept. These 6 thought, energy, intelligences, which are called in Hebrew by the code names Hesed, Gevurah, Teferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod. These are all aspects by which the force of the Lord, the thing that makes movement. It's not the body. My hand doesn't go up or down because the body talks. No. Something more internal directs physical aspects, right? The physical aspect is the revealment of everything. That's called Malchut. The earth is the physical revealment of a seed. A woman's egg is the physical revealment of the sperm. The sperm is called Ze'ir Anpin, is called the 6 aspects of the sharing force. That's the sperm. But in any event, what we have come to conclude here, why it says Yom Echad, because the first aspect of this exchange, which unifies them, therefore it says Yom Echad, not the first. Because at the beginning, in Chesed, the Spirat Chesed, when there's a clash, that creates unity. If two opposites don't talk to each other, there can never be unity. But when they begin to talk to each other, right? If they never talk, they'll never get together. But now if each one expresses himself as negative about the other, or is as opposite to the other, but there is a beginning. We call that a beginning now of a possible unification or joining of the two. But if they don't meet, even in clash, they'll never meet. So that's why it says Yom Echad. So each day was represented as what? A force. A version of a force. What we call a bottled up energy. So Yom Echad we refer to as a thought, energy, intelligence of Chesed. It's like the seed. It's all inclusive of everything. But it's only potential. But it's all unified. In the seed, do you have the trunk? Do you have the leaves? Do you have the fruit? In the seed, do you have it all? It's all there. If it wasn't all there, where did it come from? And there, how do they behave? Separately? Or are they all combined as one unified whole? As one unified whole. That's why it says Yom Echad. That is the beginning of everything. That means when the seed is planted in the earth, you don't have the roots yet. But what happens is, what creates that tree from coming out? The fact, and this is the reason according to the secret of Bereshit, when you plant that seed into the ground, what do you have? An immediate clash. An immediate clash. The seed wants to reveal. It wants to become manifested. What is the first thing the earth does? It covers it up. It conceals it. Isn't that the opposite of what the seed wants? What does the seed want? It wants everything. It's a force. It's a power. We never observe a seed. We think it's a normal thing. You plant the seed in the ground and out comes a tree. But there must be something going on more than just something physical. There must be forces. And we say there are forces. Forces of intelligent powers going on. So the moment the farmer puts that seed into the ground, do you know what makes that? In fact, they say if the earth is not right for it, what's wrong? Because the earth, which represents Aretz, real Aretz, the land, if it does not have the proper resistance, in other words, it is the opposite. We think earth draws everything to itself, right? But what happens as we explain in Talmud Sfirot, everything that hits earth, we said, shouldn't it stay glued to the earth? Doesn't it jump up a little? Chas v'sholom, it's a person who fell from the top of the Empire State Building. When he hits earth, does he go up? He does go up. Why should he go up? Gravity's been pulling down, down, down. When he finally touches earth, it should stay there, right? He should stay glued to the earth. It goes up. everything goes up. Because the earth, while it has that capacity to draw, it also has that capacity, an inbuilt capacity to resist. So when that seed is planted, what is actually happening is the earth is resisting what the seed wants. What does the seed want? To become revealed as a tree. The first thing the earth does, it draws it in, but what else does it do? It conceals it. So there's a clash between the two. The seed wants to become revealed, the earth says no. This is the secret of the Big Bang. And so the Big Bang, as I just recently read, a new theory in science, but this is a real new theory of science, that it could be the Big Bang is an ongoing process. We learned just the other day, when David said, boy, I love that cake, but I'm resisting. In effect, what you are doing at that moment is recreating the Big Bang. So now there's a new theory. The Big Bang is an ongoing process. It didn't end that first time, but it's going on all the time. It's going on all the time. That's the Big Bang.
Big bangs or smaller bangs after the Big Bang?
The same kind, the same Big Bang.
Same design, same Parashat.
That's right. You mean because it's not involving, planets. It's not involving galaxies. But we will shortly learn that it is man that controls every movement of the sun. Well, now I'm getting ridiculous, right? I mean, we're sitting here, and sure, it's nice for us to say how we control. We must have gone berserk or crazy and decided that we control the sun, right? Okay. But from a Kabbalistic point of view, and we will learn that from Bereshit shortly, that we do control every movement of the sun, of the moon. But don't they seem to move? They don't change, right? What's that? But we even learned that Yehoshua, we don't know how he did it. And of course, most scientists will say that's another one of those stories in the Bible, right? Right? But today, if someone were to tell me, tomorrow I'm going to stop the sun, and I want everybody to come out and I'm going to show everybody how I stop the sun, I'll probably draw a big crowd, right? You say millions of people. I am going to produce the stopping the sun tomorrow. What is tomorrow? November 6th? Tomorrow. Well, at least I may have just this crowd here, not the millions of people. And you're all going to join me tomorrow because I'm going to stop the sun. I'll probably have to face you at the end of the day where you'll say, but the sun set. You convinced us. We all really thought you were going to put a stop to the sun's movement. And at the end of the day, the sun is setting. Did I lie? No. You know what my answer is to all of you? The scientist says, today, everything is uncertain. You see, he says, as long as I don't look at this chair, it doesn't exist. When I look at the chair, it becomes a chair. Okay, maybe we're just laymen, we don't understand something like that, but let's accept what he has to say. I say the sun stopped, but everyone says it didn't stop. Who is right? Who is right? Both of us. Both of us.
But if you had a meter that metered how much sunlight was coming to it.
You know what they say about measuring today? You can't measure two things at the same time. You can't measure movement and you can't measure what you see. If you look at that point, you already lost the movement. You can't measure nothing today. Nothing. So who says that maybe you all see an illusion of the sun setting down, but it's still there. All right? In any event, what we have here in Yom Echad is by resistance not conforming, not agreeing, there you can have circuits of energy. But there must be an aspect of resistance, like the earth and the seed, earth and seed.
Talking about the sun, what I get is you can actually recreate the aspects of the sun, from an earlier time, like a hold it. Like if the power of Chesed that shows up in the morning, okay, if you can hold that thought intelligence and tap to it, regardless that the sun is moving physically, therefore you tap the energy and you benefit, from the power of Hashem.
That might even sound a little religious, right? But I'm a scientist. And I say whatever they say is totally true. What do they say? That reality is 99%. Does everybody see the 99% of
No.
of the table? Nobody. The scientists has told us that the only thing we see is the 1%, which is called wood. But 99% of this table is what? Something we don't see. A force, but we don't see it. So what's reality and what's not reality? Is the sun the reality, or the 99% of the sun that I don't see is reality? But you can say, no, what I see is reality. Then you're a fool, because you say 1% is reality and 99% is unreal. That's an idiot. So what Michelle is saying is really the answer. And I didn't want to dwell on that aspect, but when I said I could stop the sun, and if I was connected, like a Shabtai Donalo, who can tell me what's in the sun, what are the qualities of the sun, what are the internal forces of the sun, and yet a scientist says, or an astronomer says, we can't even reach the sun, it's too hot. But he can connect because he's connecting to the 99%. The 1% of illusion is what we saw set. But I can hold back the 99% because that deals only in the area of mind, thought, energy, intelligence. I can stop it. That's what Yehoshua actually did.
The sun conceals the forces that are at play.
That's right.
The gift of the
That's right.
Baruch Hu
That's right.
that are in there. So he knows how to tap that.
That's
Did
right.
Joshua convince the people that it would stop, or had he actually stopped them?
He stopped it. He stopped it, but then you could say it was all an illusion. Who says the fact that the sun is setting is not an illusion today? Because they say nothing that, everything, that the word uncertainty principle now is an accepted principle. Everything is uncertain. You think you're holding the cup? I can tell you you're not. And you know what? I'm also right. That's what they say today. You say a capitalist tries to make us crazy? They are. They want to convince us that we don't see anything anymore. Everything is so uncertain.
I am convinced.
Well, what about the word Elohim
Right.
in the beginning?
Right.
Bereshit bara Elohim. Where does that fit in?
Without the tetragrammaton, you mean?
Yeah.
We'll leave that alone because I want to cover some of the questions we raised. You mean, why does it say only Elohim?
No,
And that-
Bereshit bara, what is the code word for Elohim? What does Elohim mean in there? I mean, we said Bereshit, we said bara, we didn't even say bara yet.
Right.
And we left out Elohim.
Elohim means judgment, but that I would get too technical.
About the seed. The seed has all the intelligence.
Right.
What about the earth? Does it contribute any intelligence to the manifestation of the tree?
Nothing at all. Nothing at all except
The rejection.
the rejection.
What about,
Nothing more.
what about the egg? The egg does contribute to the
So does the earth. So you mean the earth still seems to contribute.
No, I'm saying
And how it becomes manifest
the egg is
will determine some of the characteristics of that fetus, ultimately the child. That is correct.
But the
However, it does not affect the force. See, the same life-giving force that is in me is in everybody else. But yet we all behave differently. Why? It's an illusion, but we all behave differently because the egg was different. But yet, what is the life-giving force? The body?
No, I'm not disputing that. I'm just asking if the seed, if the sperm and the seed has the same characteristic.
No, just the opposite. The seed and the sperm have the same characteristic. I'm sorry, yes,
Okay.
yes.
Now we have, on the other side, we have the
Earth and the egg.
Yes.
Both are the same. Both have the same energy, intelligence, or resistance. Receiving and resistance.
But also the egg has the intelligence of contributing to the fetus, the intelligence of the egg.
Of the receiving aspect, of the physical aspect, how it will develop. In other words, one person will look one way,
I mean, the woman
nothing else.
contribute any intelligence to the feet, to the child?
Only, as the Zohar says, only those parts which have to deal with negativity. Blood, not the bones, let's say, is the skin. All of the things that have to do with negativity. And I don't want it to sound as if, women are negative, but we're speaking in an aspect that you need positive and negative before you can have a
What
certain...
about the certain positive characteristic of the child? Isn't that inherited from the woman too?
The positive characteristics,
I'm asking.
that can be... But we go way off into a tangent. What are called positive characteristics?
I don't know.
He's an aggressive child. Is that positive?
Not aggressive.
It could be at the same time.
What is creative, humble?
He's creative. He's humble. Is that always good? That means everybody can step on him. If he's humble, then
Well, so let's choose something positive.
nothing you can choose. But there is one aspect that doesn't change, and that is this life-giving force of the individual. Doesn't change. There's a force, whether you want to be aggressive, you want to be humble, but there is one attachment.
It'll be only a pair.
Only a pair. So what does the earth contribute? In fact, let's ask ourselves, what does earth really contribute? If it seems to be the seed that really determines what's going to go on. In fact, the scientist now tells you that the DNA is situated where? In the egg or in the sperm? Who transfers the DNA? The sperm. No, not apparently. It's the sperm. So what does the woman have to do with it? Besides making problems.
Actually, I thought that it's more than just revealing. The woman also contributes a certain character.
What does she contribute? What does she contribute? If the DNA already determines how that child will look, how it will think, almost everything.
But the woman has DNA also. It has the genes.
She does not no. The sperm transfers the DNA, not the egg.
The woman doesn't have the DNA?
No.
Yes.
Chromosome.
The woman received the DNA via that sperm.
Through the father.
Through the father.
No, but
What about the chromosome?
Her father.
Yes.
That are contributed by the female.
That's right. But that DNA that's now included within this woman, right? This fetus that will ultimately be a female child.
Yeah.
Where did the DNA come from? Which is what we're discussing. Where did it come from? In the female child. Where did it come from? The sperm of the male, of the father.
If you far back enough, it still comes down to Adam.
The male. This is...
Alright, I want to conclude again. The woman does not determine anything. And I'm not talking about...
It seems that the woman contributes nothing other than to say, but without the egg, it seems that there will be no development. Without Mother Earth, there will be no development.
Doesn't the child look like the mother? He
Right.
inherited features.
Physical features, yes.
Physical features that she got from her father.
Right. No, but it's all in the DNA, right? Because they have to agree that, so how come the child can look like the mother? So they have to stretch this version of the DNA that's in the sperm. That also somehow is affected to an extent they don't know how, why, what, and when, is affected by the egg to whatever extent. Is affected. But we must remember again, the DNA and how this child will look and so forth and so on, when it becomes manifest in this fetus, that was transferred. The aspect of DNA is transferred by the male. Now you'll ask, how could the child look like the mother? Maybe we ought to ask the scientists. But we understand.
Oh, we do understand.
We do understand it. He has a problem with that question. He does not know the answer, incidentally.
I don't care about it.
No, because that would be that we deal with in the morning. That we deal with in the morning. Okay, we're discussing Bereshit. Okay. All right. Now, therefore, when we come to day 2 and day 3, we are not discussing days at all. So this conflict of how old the world is, the first 7 days, the world was not 4 billion years old in the very first aspect of creation. What came into existence was thought, energy, intelligences. We have code names, Chesed, Gvura, whatever. We have names for them. Yom Sheni, the word Sheni does not mean 2. It means division, separation. Doesn't 2 represent separation? 1 and 1. If it was these 2 forces combined as 1, what would they be? 1. They would not be called 2. So what does 2 represent? 2, a force that had been separated into 2 different forces. That's called 2. That is called 2. But it has again nothing to do with the aspect of day. The word yom is only a code for a kind of energy. Energy that represents what we say gevura, which represents a force that creates separation. And what is that? Negativity. Negativity, meaning I have a desire for something, I have a desire for physics. Another person has a desire for something else. It's because of our own separate desires that we have that motivates us into doing what we do. Right? It's desires that make the difference in people. In sharing, it can unify everybody. But once each one's individual desires have to be met and fulfilled, that separates everybody because everybody actually has a separate and distinct desire.
So that means it was created 2 different desires and 3 different desires?
No. Division came into the concept of division represented by negativity. It was negativity embodied already division. Let's say in day 1 we said what? The 2 aspects became unified. Then they became separated again. Then second day they became unified, and then they became separated. Then they became separated. When they became separated, that is what is referred to as Yom Sheni. 2 separate concepts came into existence. What do you mean 2 separate concepts? Electricity has more than one concept? Electricity. There's more than one kind of electricity?
No,
only one. But yet that same one form of electricity can run a generator, can run a 5-watt bulb. That means it becomes manifest as 2 separate things. When it becomes manifest, then they are different. Why is the generator different than a 5-watt bulb? Each one has a particular desire. Okay? And that happened with day 3 and day 4 and day 5.
Why didn't it say Yom Stein? Or Yom Stein? Why didn't it say Yom Sheni? The second. In other words, the second energy.
A second concept came into existence. A second concept. A second Yom meaning concept. Thought, energy, intelligence came into existence. Now.
That was the desire to receive?
That was the desire to receive. Because in the first day, was there a desire to receive? Of course. But It was unified, like the seed. In the seed, is there a root? Sure, there's a root. But at that stage, it's unified. The moment the root comes out, it's separated from the seed. Now you have a second thing, don't you? Now you see something as representing something beside the seed. That's Yom Sheni. Whenever something becomes manifest as something other than what it was. The sperm is sperm, and now suddenly there appears a fetus. It is not sperm, it is something else. But that something else at one time was unified within the sperm. Alright? So each day represented another concept. Each day represented another concept. Now we go to day 6. It says he created male and female.
I was waiting for day 3.
Oh, okay, day 3. I want to get more to the questions that I raised. Day 3 represents what?
Right, left, and center?
That's right. Obviously. The third development of anything. Because what happens now, you have two concepts. Two separate and distinct concepts. Unification, unifying, and separation. Are they one? No longer one. Day 2 represents the concept of separation. That's why it's called 2. A second thing. It's not as it was once within the seed. It's now separated. Along came another concept to unify plus and minus. How can you unify the bulb? How do you unify the bulb? How do you get electrical current to become manifest as a light bulb? You have a filament. A third force called the central column. At this point, we have the upper triad of the Magen David in effect. Remember the Magen David, the Jewish star as it's called? You have two triangles, 2 triads. The upper one and the lower one. Why is there an upper one and a lower one? Because it represents the first 3 days, not days, but first 3 concepts of creation. And these are all in the potential state. There is actual, manifested state. The lower triad represents manifested. But this has already been discussed in the Kabbalah for the layman, so I don't want to dwell on it. Alright? Now we ask the question, what about Zachar and Nekeva bara otam? He already created male and female. We're not discussing Adam and Eve any longer. We are discussing what? That energy intelligence that produces a sperm. What produces a sperm? What? A desire to share. A desire to share. It gives life. Female. What creates the egg? Who asked that question? A woman has an egg. Why does a woman have an egg and not a man? Because women represents the aspect of negativity, meaning not in a negative sense as we understand it, but earth is negative, but it's not negative in the sense of being disastrous, dangerous, or whatever. It means that it, by and within itself, can produce and make manifest things. Without Mother Earth, there can be no trees. So we can't say that this negative aspect is bad. Of course it's not bad. In fact, without female, there is nothing. Nothing will ever become manifest. So what he created here was thought, energy, intelligence. A thought of sharing creates the sperm. That thought was created on the 6th day. That thought, known by the code name Zachar, it's a word. Word doesn't mean male. It does not mean male. It means sharing. Nekeva means the aspect of receiving, like Mother Earth. An internal energy intelligence that has the capability of drawing to itself. The sperm has the capability of expending outwards, the sharing concept, and the egg to draw into itself, the sperm has that ability to capture, to receive into itself, like Mother Earth receives into itself the egg. So we're not talking about Adam and Eve at all. Okay? But that thought, energy, intelligence that created ultimately Eve was already potentially in existence here. Because what created Eve? The thought, energy, intelligence. The negative aspect. That's why a woman has menstrual. All of these aspects of what? Of red, which the color represents negativity.
So when they say Adam was lonely, and Chava was created from him, he was lonely. He's like saying he really wanted to share. He needed to share, and he was the soulmate, and she was the other half. Right. They were the first soulmates. That's right.
They were ultimately combined and became manifested as a physical human beings. That was Genesis 2. But the potential of Chava, of Eve, was right there in day 6. There's no question about that. What happened in day 7, but before we get that, now what happened in day 7? It says, this whole concept of Shabbat, you're supposed to rest. The corruption. Never meant that. Because it says, again, as you all have heard one time or another, and on the 7th day the Lord finished His work. When did He finish His work? On the 6th day? No. On the 7th day. He worked on the 7th day. So where did this concept of resting? As most of you know, the most difficult day of the week for me is Shabbat. I work the hardest on Shabbat. The other 6 days I rest. But on Shabbat I work. What? But it says, but he ended his work only because what he created on the 7th day was an aspect of where there is no Vahi Erev Vahi Boker. What does Vahi Erev Vahi Boker mean? Day and night. Positive and negative. Positive and negative. There would be conflict. On Shabbat, we could have the benefit of enjoying a day without conflict.
Resting without filament.
Without filament. Because generally throughout the 6 days, there's Vahi Erev Vahi Boker, and we know we need a central column to maintain the balance, like in the bulb. On Shabbat, there was no such concept as 2 separate entities called positive and negative that would have to be joined. They were non-existent. Because on the 7th day, God created a new concept. A joining and unification of positive and negative that would act as one unified whole.
Around the same as day 1.
The same as day 1, but for one difference.
The difference is that Or Choser is the seed for Or Choser.
This was already in the manifested state.
That's the fruit.
That's the fruit. Potential fruit, again, only in a potential state. But Chesed was just a seed. There was nothing. It was unified, but what's the good of a seed?
So on Shabbat, it's like the fruit is there for the taking.
That's right. But potential. Now all you have to do is, you on this physical level, connect with that potential state.
Manifest it.
That's right. Make it manifest. That's right. Now we come to Genesis 2. So all of this was all in a potential state. All of this was in a potential state.
Including Shabbat.
But let us never imagine Shabbat as a day of rest. The concept of rest does not exist. It does not exist. Because the word Shabbat, because he rested, is a corruption of the word Shabbat. Shabbat comes from the Hebrew word, the modern Israeli word, Shvita. He was on strike. The word Shabbat does not mean rested. Because the word for rest is vayanach. Nach, to rest. That means rest.
When was that?
Noach.
When was Vayanach?
It doesn't say. All it says is kivo Shabbat mikol malachto. In fact, vayishbot bayom hashvi. So they translate as what? And he rested on the seventh day. But the word for Shabbat does not mean rested. There is another Hebrew word for resting. And the word for Shabbat means shvita. He refrained. He struck against something. He struck against that which existed throughout the 6 days. Vayer vayboker. He created a concept that nullified, that canceled out. The opposite. It was work of canceling out the day and night factor, positive and negative, as two separate entities. He canceled out positive and negative and became unified as one whole. That's what he did on Shabbat. Okay? Now in Genesis 2, in fact, it is strange that by Hulu, the seventh day of creation begins in chapter 2. The first 6 days are part of chapter 1, Genesis 1. But isn't day 7 also part of Genesis 1? It is, and it isn't.
It's Malchut.
That's right.
So it's
and Malchut is the end. The fruit is the end. Is that right? The fruit. Is that the end of the product of a seed? But it is also what? The beginning of a new tree. It has the seed. Immediately there is a seed within that fruit.
So that fruit of Shabbat contains the seeds for everything else that...
That's right. That's right. It's the end and beginning. So everything is going to take place right there. So therefore it's inserted in 2 because that's where the action is. Everything until that point is all potential. All potential. At this point, things begin to move. Only from Malchut, from the butts, as we say, the mud, where the action is, that's where you get problems. The fellow in a mental institution, he's got no problems, right? He doesn't deal with the reality we have to deal with. He's very comfortable. He lives in paradise. Who lives in paradise outside of a mental institution? Count the number of people you know. Let's be honest with ourselves. How many? Do you know many, Label? Huh? Who knows?
This is the reason I say the one who's learning Kabbalah gets crazy.
Maybe that's what they meant. That's not a bad idea. That's right. That's right. In other words, the Kabbalist can really stay outside the mental institution. Somehow he survives and live like an insane person. Be happy. That's the problem with him, because he can maintain living in society and still be happy, and that's insanity. And they want to fix that. That's right. Do away with it. Nerve of him being content and living on the outside of a mental institution? Unheard of.
What right do you have?
What right do we have to do that? That's what they're complaining. What right do we have to learn Kabbalah? We're liable to become like an insane person. Fly on our private jet, tap Acapulco whenever we want to, and right there is a chauffeured limousine taking us from the airport.
I'm starting to believe you.
And in fact, when there's a heavy snowstorm on the ground, my jet can still take off, right? My personal jet will arrive and come back whenever I want, and no problems.
When can we cause something to happen on the other end? Let's say you want something to happen in Acapulco, that someone will be able to observe by via your thought. We're not capable of doing that.
No, except some guy can tell you one day, I saw you on the corner of Telephone and Telegraph. Don't be stupid. I mean, I was in New York, and you're talking about, San Francisco, right? I wasn't there. But I know I saw you there. But it's impossible because he was in New York. But he could swear. Then it must have been someone, we have to answer it. I mean, now he's faced with a problem. I mean, you were in New York and he saw you in San Francisco at the same time. Is that possible? The answer is yes. Because our wonderful scientists have told us that when you see a footprint on the beach today, that will be made by someone tomorrow. Explanatory? Everybody understands this? Right? Simple. That's what they're teaching us today. That the footprint on the beach today will be made by someone tomorrow. Well, we understand that. Because there's two parts to us. There's the reality of us, where we want to be. The head trip is the real me. The head trip is, what does me mean? The hand is me. What's me? The head trip. So if I decide to take a trip around the world and enjoy it for a couple of hours, and it gives me pleasure, you mean I'm not allowed? No. Take that trip, sit on the ground in that plane for 7 hours, and when you get to that hotel that you had a reservation for the presidential suite, all they'll give you is they didn't realize they were fully booked and there's only one room available. You know where? Down in the basement, right? That's living it up. Is that right?
Let's go.
That's living it up.
Only in Paradise Island.
What?
In Paradise Island that happens.
That could happen in paradise.
Always.
Always in paradise. Oh,
Always.
it happens in paradise. Is that where it happens? You see? That we must all go to Paradise Island and get our room in the basement. Hey, this is great. And this is living, right?
Shabbat is impact.
What's that?
So Shabbat is impact.
I'm not sure what you mean exactly by that word. No.
But the point where the light goes into...
Where the beginning of manifestation takes place? Yes. Like when the seed meets.
Right.
Like the seed has to go through a process. It goes through a 6-series process. And then, that's right.
So Shabbat is the impact.
Shabbat is the impact, if you want to say. That's right. That's right. And what you do on the Shabbat, that's the way the week is going to look.
And it is all Choser.
And it is all Choser, sure.
That's why it's
But is it all Choser? I mean, the new tree, is it the old tree? It's a new tree. But where did it come from? It came from the old tree, right? Is it a new tree?
Well, it has the same characteristics as the old tree.
Right, so it must... But so is there a difference between the old tree and the new tree?
But in our framework, the new tree is all that exists right now. The old tree is
gone.
Gone.
Is it?
Of course not.
Okay. This is being recorded. You don't sound normal.
So Bereshit tells me there was something before Bereshit. I mean, before this clash happened.
That's right.
Bereshit is the code to tell me there was something before them?
Before, that's right. The reason, yes. And why did these two forces clash? Now that does not say, that does not say clearly, but it's a code. For the Zohar, it's a code. Why does he have to say, Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz? He's going to discuss it anyway, isn't he? Why does he have to tell me that Genesis 1 is going to contain what? Shemayim, which is the 6th, Zeir Anpin, which is the code name, Et haaretz, which is Malchut. Why does he have to tell us that? He then discusses it. First day is Hesed. He tells me the 6th and the 1. Why does he have to insert the first verse, which is really maybe only a repetition of what really took place? He encapsulates it in the first verse, right? Why does he do that? The answer is because in there the Zohar learns the secret of why all of this came about, because of clash.
So what about the ha'ar shekashu v'vou v'choshechat u'netzav?
I said we could spend probably 7 years on it. What? No. I know. What? Noah?
Noah.
Oh, you want Noah. What? Noah means comfortable, restful. That's the portion of the week after Bereshit, and everybody's looking for that. No. The Hebrew word for Noach means comfort.
Same Noach as Noach, it's same spelling?
Yes, same spelling, sure.
Coincidence, but David put Parshat Noach.
You did. But he's not even a Taurus. He's a Gemini.
No. Somebody told me to put Parshat Noach.
Must have been a Taurus. Or a Dagim, or a Pisces, right? Bereshit, we're talking about Bereshit.
But Noach is coming up.
What? But Noach is coming up. You want to get the Noach? You get there through the clash, a paradox. By clashing, you get the Noach, you get the comfort, you get the circuit of energy.
So Bereshit is Aries and Noach is Taurus.
You can say that. You can say that. In effect,
Noach was wrapped up in a huge clash.
That's right. Only if we understand the clash that it's only a replay. Only a replay. But Chaim the Taurus wants to tell me something.
Let's all say to the Ram, we are leaving.
Right.
So the Ram said, no, say it, we can listen to someone.
So there'll be a clash. No, we have a study tomorrow morning. Okay.
We could do this
with this introduction, short introduction to Bereshit, all of the questions now will be answered. So we're talking now here, for whatever one we know now, is phase 2, Genesis 2. In other words, the development of the seed, meeting Mother Earth, and, in other words, the seed is at the beginning, the seed is at the end, however you want to treat it. Then became manifestation, the clash. First, the development of the 6 and the 1, and then the clash, the 7th day, the impact. And now, from that, comes what? Vayisa Hashem Elokim et Adam. Afar min Adama. Where did he come from? From Malchut. That's why, I don't raise all the questions that hopefully you should raise when you go home. I mean, why was he created from the earth? I mean, God's creating a man. He couldn't create him from atoms, couldn't create him from paper, from trees. I mean, there's so many things he could choose from. Even maybe from a sweet piece of candy. Maybe we would all be sweet. We wouldn't be angry. We would be pleasant. Why did he have to choose a father? And now we understand. Because we're discussing clashes between positive and negative, sharing and receiving. That's where things have to start from. Alright? So we had him, and then he told him not to eat from the tree of knowledge. Okay?
But the woman was not created from the fall.
Absolutely. That's the problem, right? Now here's what it says. Remember we said...
She wasn't made from dust.
Absolutely not.
Absolutely yes or absolutely not?
That's what I'm saying, yeah.
Well, she came from what? From him. Where did he come from? From afar. But something else happened with her along the way.
He was created from afar.
Right.
Hashem could have created her also from afar.
Right.
But he didn't.
It's like you're telling me the second tree came not from the first seed in the earth, it came from the fruit.
What I'm saying is that the first seed didn't come from a seed.
The first
It
seed,
did not come from a seed. And
no,
the second
it
seed
came from a thought, energy, intelligence.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
But we forgot. Remember we said, Zachar unekeva bara otam? So it was even there before Adam came from the earth. Right? And so what came first? The male or the female? Male. Right? And the male, and from the male comes the female. Positive and negative. Positive is cause, negative is effect. So this is the same thing here. Why would it be any different? Except it appears in another frame. It's like the second tree. Okay. Now we asked another question. Incidentally, a question that you probably, if you now begin to scrutinize this little section here in Bereshit, it says, "Ki biyom achalcha mimeno mot tamut." In the day that you will eat from this tree of knowledge, what did the Lord tell Adam? He was going to die. What happened when he ate? He didn't die. Can you imagine? Or was he threatening him? Right?
They know it's going to fall off.
Huh? Right? He was telling him, that he really wanted to scare him. He says, look, he knew he wouldn't die, but, it's like someone says, you fall off that tree, you're going to get killed, I'll kill you, right?
Calling his bluff.
He called his bluff to see if, In fact, that's what the snake even said. Maybe you won't die. Okay. But actually, he did die. He actually did die. That's going to come out in the book on the alphabet, which also we should understand and be prepared when you begin to ask a lot of questions, as scientists do, but have no answers. The extinction. You've heard extinctions. If we would only have 1/10 of the trillions of dollars spent on research on extinctions, where the dinosaurs gone? Where have they gone? We have all these different things that once existed trillions of years ago, right? How did they disappear? Where are they? Why did they disappear? Oh, we finished? No.
Don't go into that little box there?
Maybe we ought to quit. No, we have a study session in the morning.